All right. So first I want to go over just the scope of cybersecurity. So what I have listed here is just a list of various aspects of cybersecurity, different tasks, elements. And as you can see, this list is long, and you could go on for pages and pages. What I'm trying to point out here is that cybersecurity is a very wide-ranging, multifaceted discipline. Wide-ranging includes concerns from physical to logical to cloud, automation to human actions, anonymous people on the internet to customers to employees, all from a perspective of past, present, and future. So what I'm going to try to do here is kind of focus this into a more orderly, effective, and practical approach to implement in a standard business, and look at what securities may be appropriate for your business and which may be too large. So again, a disclaimer. So we're an IT company, and we are primarily, in that regard, we are primarily concerned with risk mitigation in regard to data protection and data security. So we are a little predisposed to spending a little more money to improve reliability and predictability, and the talk is going to come from that perspective. Okay, so in a more pragmatic approach, we see the really three segments to security implementation. First is the defense, just keeping the bad guys out of your network or doing bad things. It's not just your network, we'll get into that a little bit more. Monitoring, looking for signs of a security incident, and then response. How you respond to those incidents, or a better way, pre-position some of your resources to be able to respond or even prevent them. And each of these different segments have different levels or stratums, and you often want to implement them in a serpentine fashion. So we'll kind of go through that, going through all three segments of stratum 1, stratum 2, and stratum 3. And for an organization that's implementing security, it's kind of good to follow this general framework because it attacks the most important things first. So let's look a little more in depth at each of these segments. So the defense, the implementation of systems, procedures, processes, training, and culture to secure the confidentiality and integrity of the organization's data. So again, it's just putting up all your all the systems you can to keep bad guys out. Oops, a little delay there. Okay, segment 2, monitoring. The real-time and archival alerting and archiving of sensor data that attempts to identify, report on, and record a security event, as well as identify security weaknesses caused by changes in device configurations or vulnerabilities discovered. So what I'm trying to say here is that monitoring, you have the monitoring going on to look like intrusion attempts, those things, but things change inside your network too. A device can be configured by an engineer, and suddenly a vulnerability or a security hole is exposed. Likewise, new vulnerabilities are discovered every day. So you want your monitoring to be able to use those in almost real time to detect vulnerabilities that may exist in your system that were just recently discovered. So response. In response, I'm talking about the planned, coordinated, document response to a security event, or documented procedural methodologies and human actions to prevent or respond to them. And you'll kind of see what this means as we get into it a little bit more. Okay, so let's look at the first one, the most basics of security for your business. So here, defense, stratum 1, first thing you need, these are all absolutely essential. Firewall. You need some sort of firewall to prevent the inside network from being exposed to the internet. Endpoint protection, that's often called antivirus or anti-malware. The industry's kind of turned it to be called endpoint protection, which is a little more encompassing. But you need some anti-malware on all your computers. Reliable backups. So you want to have backups that are capable of restoring your data should something wipe them out entirely. And something like ransomware can easily do that. We had a whole tech talk on backups, so I'm not going to go into that in great detail here. You can look up on our YouTube channel to look at that if you're interested. Employee security awareness. So make employees aware of the basics of security. Don't pick on links in emails from people they don't know. Be aware of phishing attacks that target people. If somebody calls in saying they're from Microsoft and they want to get into your computer, don't let them. Microsoft doesn't do that. Just those basic sort of rules, and that in itself may help prevent some of these attacks. Complex rotating passwords. I did put that down as essential. It's fairly easy to set up, especially if you have a corporate domain. So that you have to use like a combination of capital, lower and uppercase letters, numbers, and punctuation, and make those rotate every 90 or 180 days, something that fits you. That is mostly so that if somebody leaves, their password will expire. Likewise, if somebody does know somebody else's password, it will become irrelevant after a little while. And of course, physical security. Make sure that your main data is in a secure area, that somebody just can't come in and walk away with your server or storage system or whatever you have. And retire surface end-of-life software and servers. So if you have any machines that are exposed to the internet and they're running old versions of Windows, like Windows Server 2003 or XP, retire those, turn them off, and replace them with something that more is current that has ongoing updates. Those old end-of-life equipment and servers no longer are getting security updates, so you're almost certain to be open to vulnerabilities. Okay, so after you work on getting this in place, the next thing to do is setting up monitoring. So these are some of the fundamental basics of monitoring. Set up your firewall so that it has firewall and intrusion alerts. Most commercial or business firewalls will allow you to do email alerts so that you actually know when something unusual is happening on your firewall. Endpoint protection alerts. So you set up your endpoint protection. Make sure that you're getting alerts when there's actually a virus that attempts to infect the machine. That becomes more important in larger organizations because Joe over there might not let you know if he's getting alerts from his antivirus, and you want to see that. Sometimes it's good to see everything that's coming in because it will let you know if there's a particular infection that's in place or an infection that's trying to be attempted. It'll give you some warning to take precautions. Get alerts about your backup success failure. Doesn't help to have a great backup system if it stopped working 2 months ago and you don't know about it. So make sure to have that in place. And of course, OS patching. Make sure that your operating systems, your computers are getting patched on a regular basis. With desktop computers, that's really easy. With Windows, it just does it by automatically now. Servers have some schedule to do the patching on. Okay, and response stratum 1. So two of the basic documents every business should have is an InfoSec policy. Doesn't have to be elaborate. Just something that goes over the basics of how you should handle security in your business and things to be concerned about. There's a lot of templates on the internet for that. The other one is a disaster recovery business continuity plan. So if something bad does happen, How is your business going to continue to operate and recover once the disaster is over? Okay, so segment stratum 2 now. This is again back to defense. So here we're going to kind of pick up where we left off before. You want to retire internal end-of-life server software and servers. So any internal XP or Windows 2003 or 2000 that you have, get those retired. If you have any Windows 95, I'm sure a museum local would like to get a hold of it. Upgrading all software to current revision and patch levels. So if you have make sure that all your software is up to the current levels. Things like Java, Adobe Reader, all those applications have vulnerabilities and they release security updates to get them up to the current levels. InfoSec employee training. Again, this doesn't have to be elaborate, but just have a little bit of training that goes on occasionally to train your employees on to go over the InfoSec policy, make sure they understand it. Laptop drive encryption. If you have any critical data on your laptops, turn on laptop drive encryption. It's free in Windows 10 with Pro Edition and higher. It's really easy, doesn't cause hardly any performance impact. And that way, if your laptop gets stolen or just lost, people can't just take out the hard drive and read all the data off of it. Another one, this one may not be applicable to your business, kind of depends on how you're using it, but bring your own device and mobile access security. There are tools you can use to help monitor access to mobile and personal devices that are brought into the corporate network. And another one that we've seen increasingly in the last couple of years is this web application firewall. We've seen a lot of cases where websites, primarily WordPress, where they get infected with viruses, and those become a launching point so that your website can actually be infecting others. So encapsulating it inside a web application firewall is fairly easy to do, cheap, and it can prevent a lot of those type of problems. Okay, monitoring on Stratum 2. So you want to set up essentially device and OS monitoring throughout your network. I've got two items here, but the first one is SNMP, which is something that's used commonly in the IT field, and syslog device monitoring, so that you can collect all those information from your workstation servers, routers, firewalls, and collect them. The other one is to do vulnerability penetration scans. That should have been on a separate line. So just periodically run those scans against your network. There's several services out there that do that. We do that for many of our clients. And it will let you know of any vulnerabilities. And again, there may be new ones that came up, so you need to do this on a periodic basis. Centralized archive logging. So you're getting all this monitoring coming in. You want to really put it in a centralized location and have it archived as well too, so you can keep at least a year or so of data. So that if you do have if you do find a breach or infection on your system, you'll have the logs to go back and investigate and see what the source was. And third-party patch management. This is a system where I talked earlier about updating the patch levels on like Java and Adobe Reader. This will do that automatically. So if you have that software installed, it will just take care of those and you don't have to worry about it. And then again, bring your own device and mobile access monitoring, knowing what devices access the network when and what they will do. All right, Stratum 2, segment 3 response. So here you should probably implement a security incidents and response plan. So it's a formalized procedure of that if somebody notices a security incident, what they should do, who they should inform, the escalation, the team members that should be involved. So like one of that is that if somebody sees a virus on their machine, the first thing they do is shut it off. Likewise, if they suspect that they're seeing files modified that shouldn't be, to let their supervisor know, steps for the supervisor to let the IT department know. And the other one is third-party security requirements. So if you have third-party vendors who have access to your network, they are a security risk as well. So you should make sure that they have certain security protocols inside their organization. A notable one of this is, if you remember the Target breach a few years ago, that actually came from a third-party provider. I think it was a heating and air conditioning provider who had access to their network that let an infection in that allowed them to steal all the data. Okay, so defense again, stratum 3, third level. So here we're getting into some more sophisticated stuff. The first one is identity management, multi-factor authentication. This will help you assure that those people who are logging in really are who they say they are. It prevents a lost password sort of thing, or if somebody gives their password to someone else, it's kind of irrelevant, because with multi-factor authentication, there's going to be a secondary check, and that person won't be able to log in with just a password. Commercial firewall. Here you really need kind of a commercial firewall that has more capabilities, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection. Most of these commercial firewalls will also have a unified threat capability. With that, you can do content management, making sure that people aren't going to bad sites or sites you don't want them to. Application management, so that you can see who's using Facebook, any of those sites, and you can shut down those if you need to. Edge of network antivirus, so it will scan files as they're coming in and make sure there's no viruses or malware on. At this level, you might even look at desktop and server drive encryption. You've already encrypted all your laptops that are out field, but maybe you want to go ahead and encrypt all of those that are in the office, so that if anyone steals a desktop that's in your office, they still can't get the data off of it. Likewise with servers. Remote access health check. So when people VPN into your network, make sure this will run an agent check on their machine to make sure that it has antivirus, any other requirements that you have, or they won't be allowed access. This makes sure that people who are accessing remotely from their home computers or wherever have the security that they need, so that you have a reasonable expectation they're protected as well. Network segmentation. Here you want to move important critical data, like your core servers, off to a separate network, possibly via firewall, and set up access rules to your internal network, so that you can lock it down to only the type of communications that you actually expect to see. Application whitelisting. So in most businesses, most people only have a preset number of applications they need to use. With this one, with application whitelisting, you can say only those are allowed to run on these computer systems. And if they try to run something else, it'll just shut it down. This also means that most infections that your computer will get, it will shut down as well. Okay, so let's go on to stratum 3, Signet 2 monitoring. Okay, so compliance audit. So you have all these policies and procedures. So some companies will want to have an outside firm come in and monitor, audit them to see if they're actually complying with their own policies and procedures. Change management. Any change to your network should be documented and approved before it's made, and then a report done after the change is implemented. This allows you to know, for one thing, if you have an error in your network, it allows you to quickly identify what was the cause and reverse it. But it also, if there's a vulnerability that's exposed, you can see when and where that happened and correlate that with the monitoring log. Log integrity monitoring. So you're doing all these synchronized archived logs, but a sophisticated attacker will try to go into those logs and actually delete all their information so you don't know about it. Well, with log integrity monitoring, it will help prevent that, and it will also alert you if it sees logs being tampered with. File integrity monitoring is another one. That makes sure that certain files, it should say static and important, such as programs, DLLs, if you know what those are, they should not be changing. It lets you know if there's if somebody has tampered with those files. Again, it lets you know if something's going wrong with your system that shouldn't be. All right, so response, strategy 3. So you may consider implementing a security standards compliance within your organization. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And if you want to go even further, you get certified in those standards. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the other one is a risk assessment. Risk assessment is actually a fairly large endeavor. It can be small, but there's people who spend their whole career just doing risk assessment. It's really looking at every part of your infrastructure and assessing what's the risks, what do you have to do to mitigate those risks, what are the costs and the trade-offs with that, and just making a business case on each individual instance on what's a good balance between cost and security. Okay, so which stratum is right for your business? What I'd say is that for stratum 1, every business with any non-public or critical path data. So if you have any data on your computer that you don't want other people to get, or you couldn't live without, you need to do those very basic security precautions. If you have a laptop that your sole thing is just accessing the web and looking at it, maybe it doesn't matter. But very few businesses run that way. Stratum 2, these are most businesses with, I'd say, more than about 10 plus people. It kind of depends on your profile, what you're doing, how large you are. But in general, that's where at about 10 plus employees is where a company would be considering doing that Stratum 2 implementations. Stratum 3 is really for high profile businesses, financial type entities, and larger corporations. There's a lot involved in the Stratum 3 technologies, a lot of cost, a lot of effort. So I talked a little bit earlier about security standards. So these are some of the common ones that you've heard of before. HIPAA, of course, is one for healthcare, and you're mandated to abide by that if you're in the healthcare field. PCI, that's for credit card processing. Most businesses that take credit cards at least have some familiarity with PCI at the merchant level, or companies that do very large credit card transactions. The PCI requirements are much higher, much larger to install. ISO 27001 and 2. This is kind of a general framework of security implementation. 27002 is really a better guideline framework for a lot of business to work off of. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, they have a whole suite of security standards. There are some that are more common than others. You could decide to implement some of those on your business. FIPS, that's a governmental one for non-military. All government installations need to follow those. That's more than just security. It's a bigger framework, but it does have a large security component to it as well. This GDP, and is one you may hear about in upcoming months, it's a new European requirement that all companies doing business in the European Union must abide by May next year. So you'll probably hear more about that. The last one I'm going to talk about is the SSA 16. You've probably heard about that. I'm specifically talking about SOC 2 here. SOC 1 is more just the reporting about financial statements. SOC 2 is more security infrastructure, and Type 1 and 2. So Type 1 is more just a report on your current policies and procedures, whereas Type 2 is, so Type 1 is usually your first year, and year 2 and onward is a Type 2, where they actually not only document your policies and procedures, but whether you comply with them. The weakness of potential weakness of an SSA 16 is it's really just verifying that you're following your own procedures. So unless you're doing an SSA 16 audit against some other standards, it's kind of up to you what you want to be doing. Okay, so do you want to adopt a security standard? These are some of the things considered. Adopting any of these, other than the SSA 16, is pretty well assured to get your infrastructure in really good shape from a security perspective. Any of these are a significant undertaking in time, money, and effort, even if you don't get certified. These are large documents. They can be 50 to several hundred pages. Each of them with bullet points. There's a lot to go through. It's usually can often be a multi-year effort. If you actually want to get certified, those are expensive. I haven't seen an annual one cheaper than $15,000, and it can go much higher than that. But it will put you in a good position. If you implement any of these, it does put you in a good position to implement any of the other ones. So you may have HIPAA installed, and then you need to do a higher level PCI. It's actually much smaller effort than just going to the PCI directly. And in general, I'd say these are only a good idea for large or highly secure organizations. There's just too much cost involved in that. So again, this was just meant to be an overview of trying to bring the large umbrella of security into more manageable, plan-driven series of steps. I'll be going into some more of these steps in our newsletters in December and January, so sign up for those. Learn a little bit more about those particular areas, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Just give it a minute in case anyone wants to enter anything. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can feel free to send them to us, and we're here to help if you need anything. Thank you.